Hi everyone. We'll just wait for a few seconds until everyone has joined us. I can see lots of people arriving, which is great. So we'll just give that a few more seconds before we start properly. Okay, I think that's about everyone here. So hi everyone, nice to see you on this Friday afternoon. This is the last session of today for the MyTutor online school, and this is GCSE Biology. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Charlotte, hi. I've taken all of the GCSE Biology classes so far, so those of you who've been before will know me. I have been tutoring with MyTutor for 2 or 3 years. I've got a MSc in Conservation and Biodiversity from the University of Exeter, and I now work in conservation and ecology and agriculture as well. Actually, my job combines all three. So that's my kind of background. I think before we move on, because it's Friday, I wanted to say hi to everyone and maybe pop in the chat kind of where you're saying hi from. Don't be too specific, but your county or your country or your city, and just say hi, because it'd be lovely to hear from you all. So I can see hi from Santati at the moment. Hi from Manchester, from Taib. Hi, Taib. Summer is down in Cornwall. Lucky you, Summer. What a lovely place to spend lockdown. Navan Hatfield. Hi everyone. It's nice to hear from you. Okay, that's it so far. I imagine we'll see a few more in a second. There's about 30 of us here today, so there's a good spread. Okay. Yep. Okay. So we'll move on to our slides for today. Oh, I can see a couple more questions. Chat. Oh, hello, Richard from Sevenoaks, Callum in Northamptonshire. I am in Gloucestershire at the moment in the UK. That's where I am. Thanks for a good question. It's kind of sunny here, but it's been raining the last couple of days, which has been good for anyone trying to grow any crops. So lots of the farmers that I work with, but hasn't been so nice for the rest of us. Okay, so today we're starting a new topic. So if you haven't joined before, you're joining at a really good time. We have based all of our lessons so far on the AQA specification for GCSE Biology, but we've tried to keep them fairly general. So these are all topics that will come up over all specifications. So if you're not studying AQA, don't worry, you're not wasting your time. So today we're introducing this new topic, which is homeostasis in the body. So we're going to go over today a couple of principles of that, and then we're going to talk about the nervous system and the role that that plays in homeostasis. So last week we finished off respiration and we did some exam technique questions as well. So if you missed that, then you can have a look on the MyTutor online school website and you'll be able to find the recordings there. But for today, we're starting this new topic. So we're going to start with a Slido, which we quite often do at the beginning of a topic to find out how much you guys know already, because I think there's some people here that are wanting to take their GCSE biology onto A-level, and so we're using this as a way to keep up. And then there's also people that haven't quite started GCSE yet, and there's others of you that are preparing to take exams. So we've got kind of a huge variety of expertise here. So I'm going to pull up the Slido and I'm going to put the link to this question in the chat. So if you pull up the chat, this is a good time to mention the chat and the Q&A buttons that you've got at the bottom of your screen. So the chat section we use for general chit chat, so where are you from, any kind of comments that you might have, pop them in the chat. If you've got any questions about the content, I will stop several times throughout the lesson and talk about those and go through them, so pop them in the Q&A and then I'll know where to find those specific questions about the topic. Okay, so you've got a link in the chat box now. If you open that up on your screens, it's a question about homeostasis. So it's asking you what keywords you already know about homeostasis. And you should be able to see it on this screen as well. So what keywords can you think of for the topic homeostasis? You can answer as many times as you want. And we're just going to build up this word cloud of kind of what understanding we have so far. Good. Stability, stimulus, balance, nerve, receptor, homeostasis, that's a good one. Motor neuron, great, these are all good. These are all words that we're going to come across today as well. So that's really good. This will be a good revision session for those of you popping those on. Brain, yes. Balance, good. Coordination center, yeah. Contraction, insulin, good. That's something that we're going to cover in a couple of sessions' time. Amazing. Lasts a lifetime. Yes, it does. Homeostasis is something that our bodies are always kind of in the process of maintaining. Endocrine gland, yeah, really good. Balance is coming up again and again, which is exactly what homeostasis means. We'll talk more about that over the next couple of slides. 2 bits of the nervous system. What other new ones have we got? Elongated axon. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, that's talking about different types of nerves. Other ones that we've got there, secretion of hormone. Yeah, nice. Stimulus, new one there. Again, important. It is really important. Balance and death on there still. Equilibrium. Ooh, I like that word. Equilibrium's a good one. Keeps you alive. Yes, quite right. Whoever put that one. Acid-base balance. Hypothalamus. Ooh, loads of great keywords here. Myelin sheath. Yeah. Nervous system. Voluntary impulse. Amazing. CNS in there as well. I can't quite keep up with all the new ones coming in. They're all really relevant so far. Fab. Okay, great job. I think this is definitely going to be a revision session for lots of people. So I have stopped that now. So I'm going to come off there. Well done, everyone. That was definitely, has given me a good understanding of what you already know. And I think today will be, for a lot of you, quite a lot of revision, which I think is good. So it's a good place to start before we go on and explain the topic a bit more in later sessions. So, homeostasis. So we've already put all of those keywords down for homeostasis. But I wanted to run through a little bit why homeostasis takes place in our bodies and what it is. So basically, as mammals, we, so ourselves as humans and other types of mammals survive in a huge variety of conditions and environments. So for example, we have mammals at both poles and also in the tropics. So as a start, we survive in an awful lot of different temperatures. We also survive in different levels of humidity. We have mammals that survive in water and on land. So we have to have a very adaptable operating system within our bodies. And one of the characteristics of being a mammal, which is something that we tend to learn at school when we're talking about classifying organisms, is that mammals maintain a constant internal temperature. And that allows us to survive in all of these external conditions because those external conditions aren't affecting the internal conditions within the body. So maintaining fairly constant, optimum internal conditions is called homeostasis. That's what homeostasis is. It's basically us keeping everything fairly constant in our body, staying in balance, keeping that equilibrium that you popped on the Slido word cloud there. That was a really good word. Balance was also on there, and you're quite right, it does do a lot towards keeping us alive. So for example, in very cold conditions, keeping that internal temperature stops us freezing. So within GCSE, we normally explore homeostasis over kind of 3 kind of systems in the body. So we talk about body temperature, we talk about the body's water content, and we also talk about blood glucose concentration and how those are determined. So for body temperature, enzymes have an optimum temperature, and enzymes control pretty much all cell functions, which contributes to tissues, organs, and whole organ functions. So that's why keeping a constant body temperature is so vital. So it helps us keep those enzymes at optimum temperature so that we can function as efficiently as possible. Can you think of examples of how or why we control water content in our bodies, and why we and how we keep and control our blood glucose concentration levels? Pop answers in the chat. Good, type water so we can have a larger concentration gradient for osmosis. Yes, we've talked a lot about this in previous sessions. So transport of water helps us to transport other things around our bodies, osmosis. So yeah, keeping that balance of water is really, really important. Yes, for keeping, so in plants, for keeping cells turgid. Yes, that is exactly a good example. Blood glucose for storable energy / immediately usable. Yes, that's another really good example. So you want glucose to be available for respiration, which was the last topic that we talked about. Our body gets rid of waste liquid. Yeah, exactly. So our body gets rid of a waste product called urea in our urine. So that all contributes to management of water in the body. Because urine is made up of urea and water. So we have to keep the water balance roughly right. Well done, Summer. And Olivia as well, talking about glucose. Yes, really good. Okay. Move on to the next slide. This is a complicated slide. I'm sorry that it's all so crowded together. It hasn't come across quite as I had hoped. So we'll start at the top and move down. So homeostasis, we've kind of already talked about what it is, but I've put a kind of official definition at the top of this slide. So homeostasis is the regulation of the internal conditions of a cell or organism to maintain optimum conditions for function in response to internal and external changes. So it's quite a complicated way of saying that it just keeps everything in balance. But it brings into that definition external and internal changes, and is very clear about where those are taking place. So this session from now on is going to be mainly about how we monitor those conditions. So that long definition, the regulation of the internal conditions of a cell or organism to maintain optimum conditions for function in response to internal and external changes. It's complicated and it needs an awful lot of monitoring in order to maintain that equilibrium. And to do that, we have specialist systems in our bodies that are specifically for just monitoring. So not even for doing anything about it, they're just for detecting any changes. And we call these automatic control systems. And those automatic control systems are nervous responses in the nervous system and chemical responses in the hormone system. So changes to conditions can be responded to through nerves or hormones, or detection of changes. So that's the nerves. Our nerves are part of the nervous system, and hormones are part of the endocrine system. So those, a couple of you popped endocrine in that word cloud. And endocrine is the word that we use to describe almost anything to do with hormones. So the endocrine system. Okay, I'm going to move this down slightly now, and we're going to look through this diagram. So these are, I think, will be revision for some of you. If you haven't covered this before, don't worry, we're going to go through this in detail today. But these are the features of all control systems. So we're talking about our nervous system and our endocrine system here. And they all have receptors. So starting at the beginning here, we'll talk more about stimuluses later. But receptors detect changes through a stimuli. So the stimuli is a change in the stimulus is a change in the environment. So stimulus is the singular, stimuli is the plural of that word. So receptors detect stimuli in the internal or external environment. And again, receptors can be nerves or hormones, so they can be part of the nervous system or the endocrine system. The receptors, having detected that change, pass the information onto a control center. And the change is there compared to a set point. So what they're trying to get across in this part of the diagram is that we have what we expect to detect from that stimulus, and then any change that's detected is compared to that set point. So a control center or a coordination center receives and processes the information from the receptor, which has detected the change, and then that control or coordination center sends out signals to coordinate the response. So in ourselves, our control center is our brain and our spinal cord. They make up the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. And for the endocrine system, there's some organs such as the pancreas that have a similar role. And finally, we have effectors, which are muscles or glands. These are where the response takes place to that change. So the muscles or glands bring about the response and restore whatever condition it was that had changed to its optimum level. So this is a very general description. We haven't gone into any detail here about specific effectors or how those signals are passed. This is just a very general diagram introducing how a change is detected, it's sent to our control center or coordination center in our brain and our spinal cord, and then the response is sent out to effectors, so our muscles or our glands. The change is corrected, and then you start again. So it's this kind of positive feedback loop of always correcting that change. Okay, I'm going to just whip over and answer some questions because I know there's a lot of writing on that slide, and some of you will be making notes. Oh, someone's saying, went to my tutor page for private lessons. It says I'm unavailable. Oh, I'm not unavailable. I'll check my settings for whoever that was. Yeah, try again later today. I'll check that straight after our lesson. That's fine. Okay. Can I make this slide a little smaller? I expect I can. Try and get it all in at once. We've got this kind of annoying lesson scheduler thing here. There we go, that's it all on one page there. Okay, so a couple of people now asking about one-to-one tutoring. So MyTutor, as well as group sessions like this, we also offer one-to-one tutoring. It's not just me, there are lots and lots of tutors to choose from, so you can pick whoever you feel suits your subject most. So it's well worth having a look on the MyTutor website, having a look through. These sessions are free, whereas private tutoring has some cost. But yeah, well worth having a look at. So we offer that as standard at all times of year, whereas obviously these group sessions are because of COVID-19, or have started because of COVID-19. Okay. So let's talk more about the nervous system. That's what we're going to talk about in general today. I'm going to make this slightly smaller as well. There we go. So why do we have a nervous system? Well, we've kind of talked about that a little bit already, but our nervous system helps us react to our surroundings, it coordinates our behavior, and it carries electrical signals around the body. So our nervous system is kind of the equivalent of electric wires in our houses. So all of those signals, so for example, when we want to turn on a light, travels along the electric wire and the light turns on. Kind of similar for our nervous systems. We have nerves all over our body. We have kind of two nervous systems, which you can see on this diagram on the right here. So we've got the central nervous system, which we talked about in the previous slide, which is the brain and the spinal cord. It's our control center, it helps coordinate the response. And then we have the peripheral nervous system, which is all of the nerves that run from that central nervous system to all of the different parts of our bodies. So you can see them in the blue here. They run literally to the ends of our fingertips and the tips of our toes. And again, I've popped this diagram in here just so that you can kind of relate that to the nervous system. So the fact that it's the nervous system that's carrying those signals from the receptors to the control centers and to the effectors. Our nervous system is why it's how we feel. It passes our brain information of what we're feeling. It also coordinates what we're seeing, what we're smelling, all of those things. And all of those things are where we sense a change. So we can sense a change in temperature by feeling. So we have what are called thermoreceptors. And then we have chemoreceptors in our noses that detect changes in chemical smells, the same in our mouths for taste. So we have different types of receptors that detect those changes, and then they are all connected to the nervous system. Okay. So we're going to run through that kind of arc or that diagram in more detail now. So we're going to talk about each separate part, and we're going to talk about its role, and we're going to piece it together. So at the top here, I've got this where we're building up the different parts of that diagram, and then also along the side, and this will fill up as we go down the slide. So hopefully you'll see the progression as we go along. So as we said, a stimulus is any change in the world around you. So the stimulus is picked up by a receptor cell in our body. So receptor cells are clustered in special sense organs, e.g. the eyes or the skin. So as we said just now, we talked about all of our different senses. So for example, we have light receptors in our eyes, we have pressure and pain receptors in our skin. We have taste buds in our mouths. You can see in this diagram of a cat, they've talked about how in its ears it has receptors that are sensitive to changes in position for balance. So that's something that our ears are really good at, detecting balance. Receptors sensitive to sound in the ears as well. Receptors that are sensitive to light in the eyes. And nose and tongue receptors are sensitive to chemicals, so chemoreceptors. And to skin, receptors which are sensitive to touch, pressure, pain, and temperature changes. So lots of different types in the skin. I also wanted to outline the fact that each mammal, or in some cases instinct, but most beings have adapted in some way so that their receptors are most sensitive for when they need it most. So for example, a shark has really keen chemoreceptors that can pick up a drop of blood at however many meters away, and which means that they get food quicker. That's what they're supposed to do. So they are adapted with these really sensitive chemicals to the smell of blood, really sensitive receptors. And this moth here has these really clever receptors in its antennae that pick up sound and also can be used for echolocating. So they use sound to work out the distance to objects around them. I think they also use these to pick up the smell of a mate from a long way away. They're very cool, these particular moths. Anyway, the point of this is that different organisms have more or less sensitive receptors for different things. It's part of the adaptations of that organism. So the next step, so we've talked about how the stimulus is a change, it's picked up by those receptor cells, and then that signal is passed to the coordinator, which is the central nervous system. And you can see on the right-hand side, we've added in an extra part of the process here, which is the sensory neuron. So once a receptor cell has detected a stimulus, it sends an electrical impulse along neuron cells. So we have covered neuron cells before. They're specialized cells for carrying nervous impulses, electrical impulses. Neuron cells are bundled together into nerves. So that's what a nerve is. It's lots of neuron cells all bundled together. And the nerves that carry an impulse from the receptor to the central nervous system are called sensory neurons. The central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. We've talked about that already. And it coordinates the response to the information received from the receptor. Again, kind of covered that so far. And I've got a nice diagram here of the sensory neuron. We did briefly talk about how nerve cells are adapted to their function, but it's worth having a quick look again. So the impulse moves along the bundles of neuron cells in a specific direction, indicated by the arrow at the bottom. So it moves from the receptor cells along dendrons. And again, the dendrons, which is where the electrical impulse passes through, run all the way along the neuron. The nucleus is midway along for a sensory neuron, and the cell body is midway along as well. So you can see there, it's kind of got the basic parts of an animal cell. So a nucleus, a cell body, and a cytoplasm, all there. The dendrons, or the axon, is surrounded by a myelin sheath that protects it. So it kind of insulates it. It's a bit like having rubber around wires. And then finally, you've got the axon terminals at the end where it connects to the next neuron and passes that signal on. Okay. Okay, so then to get from the central nervous system, or the coordinator, to the effector, we move along another type of nerve. So motor neurons, which are the second type of nerve, carry impulses from the central nervous system to whatever the right place in the body is. So the right pieces of the body are the effectors, and they create the response. So motor neurons are how signals get from our brain and our spinal cord to the effectors, which are our muscles or our glands. So effectors can be muscles or glands, and they respond by contracting or relaxing in the case of muscles, or secreting a chemical, a hormone. So for example, salivary glands produce saliva when you smell food cooking. It's a really simple kind of thing to think about when you're thinking through this arc. Motor neurons have a slightly different structure to sensory neurons. So motor neurons tend to have a slightly longer axon. The cell body is at the top. And you can see the direction of the nerve impulse. So this cell body and the nucleus are at the top here with the dendrites, which would be attached either to the central nervous system or to a motor neuron further up the line, depending on where you are. We've got the axon surrounded by a myelin sheath again, same as the sensory neurons, and then axon terminals at the end, and they feed into the effector cells, so for example, muscle cells. So that's kind of the end of that arc. It'd be good to do a bit of a case study, so working through the stuff on the right-hand side. So let's think about when we smell food. So when we smell food, the receptor cells for smelling are in our nose. So we have receptors in our nose that sense the smell of that food, chemoreceptors. They then pass information along a sensory neuron to our central nervous system, so our spinal cord and our brain. Brain goes, ooh, smells good. And then sends a response along a motor neuron. Motor neuron reaches effector cells in our mouths, our salivary glands, which then produce saliva. We produce saliva because it has chemicals in it that help us to digest food. So it's us preparing to eat, preparing to get that energy into our body. So that's a kind of case study. Any questions? So question break. Any questions in the chat or the Q&A? Try and keep them in the Q&A if you can. I'll run through the chat quickly because I've noticed a few. Yeah, our body does have electricity. It's very much confined to our nerves rather than us just being, so we still get an electric shock. But yeah, within our nerves, it's all those myelin sheaths kind of insulated. So it's not like you get an electric shock from your own nerves. Okay, another question. Do you think life will ever go back to normal from COVID? And also, do you think there will ever be a vaccine? There was never one for SARS. Good question. I think life will go back towards something. This is my opinion, and it's something that we should all be kind of forming opinions about, I think. But I think life will go back to some sort of normality. I don't know whether it will be quite the same. I think everyone's using this as an opportunity to think a bit differently. I think there will be a vaccine. As far as I know, they're working on it really hard now, which is great, because only with a vaccine, I think, can we go back to having large groups of people gathering together. I don't know when that will come out. I know as much as you guys, as much as is in the news. There was never a vaccine for SARS. I agree with you on that. And SARS was something that we were all worried about, but we never went into a lockdown. You know, we never had this response. So I think COVID-19 has caught everyone out with just how aggressive it is. Are we doing exam style questions today? Yes, I've got one after this, and then yes, we are doing a Kahoot quiz because it's Friday. Can I go back to slide 6? Yes, I can. No problem. Sorry, Richard, I should have picked that up a bit quicker. So the top is stimulus, receptor, and coordinator, but I'll leave the rest, otherwise it'll be too small for you to see properly. Yeah, I've heard that they have a vaccine that works and they need to do a specific amount of testing. I mean, again, this is something that we covered earlier on as well, the testing of new drugs, which comes under vaccines as well. So we talked about the process that goes every drug or vaccine goes through. So it goes through testing on different organisms. So it goes through laboratory testing. It will go through animal testing if needed. It doesn't always. And then it will go through some trials with human volunteers once they know whether it's safe enough to do that. So there's lots and lots of tests to make sure that that vaccine is safe and that it definitely does what it's supposed to do. And then finally, it will be peer reviewed by scientists. So there will be multiple minds that look at that, make sure that it is doing what it's supposed to do. And hopefully eliminating any kind of bias in the scientists that developed it first. So that's the general process that drugs go through, or vaccines, when they're being developed. Do we think there'll be a second wave as lockdown was opened really early? That's a really good question. I think we're going to see. Next couple of weeks will show that, so it'll be really interesting to see. Is this linked to reflexes, like when a doctor taps our kneecap? Okay, so back to the nervous system. Yes, Summer, it is exactly. So we're actually going to talk more about this on Monday, about the reflex arc, which is essentially what we've talked about today, but it's like an involuntary response. So yeah, when a doctor taps your kneecap, he's testing to see whether you, whether your nerves are working, as in messages are being passed between your receptors, your central nervous system and your effectors. Does the electrical signal go to the brain and the spinal cord, or just one? That's another really good question. It depends. Most of them pass through both, because obviously your spinal cord runs from the top to the bottom of your body and motor neurons and sensory neurons attach to it at different points. So essentially it kind of gathers them all and then it can send the signals up to the brain. But obviously there are others that might go straight to the brain. Do I personally do peer review? No, I'm not highly trained for that. Not as highly trained as you need to be to do that. They're just saying what comes after the coordinator. There you go, that's the next slide.